You don't believe me, do you? Well, pull up a chair, take a listen. So, this was back in the days when Air Jamaica started flying from Fort Lauderdale to Kingston, Jamaica. I also believe they flew to Montego Bay at the time. But in this story, it turns out that it's a flight from Kingston to Fort Lauderdale. Now, this was a year that I went down to Jamaica, as I would often do. Generally around the Christmas season, the month of December, I would be down there at least 2 weeks before Christmas and all the way past New Year's Day. At the time, my son was 11 months old. So I head down to Jamaica, but this was one of those years where I came back. I think it was the first trip that I ever took to Jamaica around the Christmas season where I came back before the month of December was over. So I decided to, my son was with me and also my ex-wife. Um, we were coming back earlier. I think it was like December 28th. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to leave my son over here in Jamaica with some other family members who were coming over a little bit later, coming over in the month of January. And I said, let me just leave him over here so he can immerse himself in his culture a little bit more. Because the reason we had to come back was there were some things we had to handle. And it would have been a little bit inconvenient having him with us back in Fort Lauderdale. As a matter of fact, I think we had to go to another state. I don't remember the details actually. So we decided the best thing to do was to leave him in Jamaica. Didn't have to pay for him at the time. He was under the age of 2. So we said, let him stay down there with his mother's family and be a little bit more immersed in the Jamaican culture and that he can enjoy himself down there. So on the day he was supposed to come over, this was before cell phones. A couple of things that I need to let you know. This was before 9/11. This was before cell phones like we know them today. And this was also during a time, because it was before 9/11, there was no TSA. As a person waiting for people coming in on flights, you could actually go down to the gate and you could actually stand there and watch your loved ones or whoever you're meeting come off the flight. You can literally stand there and watch them coming off the flight through the I forget what you call those things, through the jet port. There's another name for it. I can't remember what it is, but you can actually watch them coming out. So at Fort Lauderdale International Airport, as they would come through, there was a glass tubing where you could see them coming through. And as they come out, they had to turn and they walk maybe about a good 40 feet, 50 feet of glass. So you could actually see them walking past before they come through the door. So we go and we're standing there and the flight landed, came in. It was at night, probably like around 8 something at night. Jamaica's usually about an hour behind at that time of the year. So I remember it was like somewhere around 8, 9 o'clock. I guess it was 8 o'clock Jamaica time. Over in Florida, it would have been like 9 o'clock. So we're standing there and we're waiting. Now before, need to set this up also. Before they left Jamaica, we did make the necessary phone calls. And you have to understand, at the time, my ex-wife's family lived about 4 hours away from Norman Manley International Airport in Kingston. And the reason for that back then was because the road leading from where she lived or her family lived all the way to Kingston was a local road basically. And it took that long to travel 60 some odd miles to get all the way to Kingston. Today it's different because they've built highways now, so you can make that in about an hour and a half, if that much. So we made the necessary phone calls before they left to go to the airport. It was like, yeah, we're getting to the airport, we're ready to leave, we're whatever. Didn't have cell phones back then, so they couldn't call us on the road to let us know. But they got all the way to the airport And how we knew they made it was because they called back home to the family house out in the Manchester area of Jamaica, and to let them know we arrived at the airport, and they went on their flight and so forth. So that's the last thing we heard, that they made it on their flight. Now, the family who brought them to the airport had taken off and gone back to, or heading back to their home. So while the flight is in the air, they're on the road going back. So we can't really talk to anyone at that time to find out if everything went okay and so forth. But we did know they left the airport because they did call back to the family house to say, hey, if Dexter calls, just let them know that they got on the flight safely and we're on our way back home. So as far as we know, they're on the flight. We get to Fort Lauderdale's airport. And again, we can't call anyone as yet because it only took about hour and 45 minutes or whatever to get from Kingson to Fort Lauderdale. It's taken them 4 hours to get home. So we can't speak to them because, again, this is before cell phones. So we're at Fort Lauderdale Airport and the flight lands. And we're watching the passengers come off, and they're coming off, they're coming off, they're coming off, they're coming off. Then we saw the pilot and the crew members coming off the flight, walking past. And we're looking, don't see anybody else behind them. And all of a sudden we're wondering, where's our son? What happened to him? He came up on the flight. They said that he was on the flight. They watched them go on the flight because at Norman Manley back then, I don't know if things have changed, it was the old-fashioned, you walk onto the tarmac, you walk up the stairs, and you went into flight. The family members saw them walk up the stairs and go onto the flight. So now we have a big mystery in our hands. And it wasn't just us. There were probably about another 3 people behind us who looked just as confused. They're like, wait a minute, I had someone coming over on this flight, and I don't see them. So I rushed back up to the Air Jamaica counter. And when I got up there, this was the time of night when the airport was pretty much dying down. There wasn't really any flights coming in or anything. And we looked and we saw the Air Jamaica employees behind the counter putting their bags over their shoulder, and they're walking, going out of the airport. And I'm sitting around like saying, what a bum. Anyway, and I'm trying to find out, wait, somebody needs to explain something to me here. The flight crew and everyone, pilots came off and they're gone. You guys are leaving from behind the counter. And we who are here, we're missing people who were supposed to come over on that flight. Can you all explain to us what happened? Again, this was back in the day when there was not much, cell phones were not really there. So we told the employees like, hey, look, you got to come back here and explain some things to us. So they start looking through and they start researching, can't figure out what's going on. And they're looking around, they're trying to find out what's going on and so forth, still don't know. At the time, the family members in Jamaica still had not reached back to the house in Jamaica as yet. And we're going back and forth, upset, worried, wanting to know what happened. I didn't think that they threw them out of the plane, that they landed in the Caribbean Sea. I didn't hear of any emergencies, but that's the only thing you can think of. They went on the flight. The flight landed, but they're not on the flight. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Eventually, start to make some headway. After they start to make some phone calls and everything like that, they found out, and everyone knows this, who dealt with Air Jamaica in the past. While they were a very safe airline, they weren't always the most efficient, and they weren't always the best when it came to communicating, because I do have another story about them that I'm going to tell soon. So while we're there making headway, and they made some phone calls, and they happened to make a phone call down to Miami. When they called down to Miami, come to find out, what transpired inside the terminal was that the flight to Fort Lauderdale was overbooked. What they decided to do at the last minute was to take the passengers who could not make it on the Fort Lauderdale flight because the flight was overbooked and put them on the Miami flight, which was, I guess, not overbooked. Because at that time, there was a population shift there in the Jamaican community where a lot of people ended up moving to, a lot of Jamaicans had moved over to Broward County where Fort Lauderdale is. So the Miami flight was not really overbooked. So they put my son and his family on that Air Jamaica flight. The other problem was the family members didn't quite know where we lived or had lost track of what our house number was. No, they knew what the house number was. The problem was they were calling the house, but we were at the airport to let us know that's where they are. I think Air Jamaica may have also been trying to call for us, but we were at the airport. So we didn't end up talking to anyone, which is kind of weird. We did not end up talking to anyone on the phone to say, this is our address, this is where we live. The other problem now that we know that they're safe, that they're in Miami, Air Jamaica now is chartering a van to bring them home. Only one problem. I don't think the family members knew what the address was. We had to go home. So now they're on the way and don't know where they're going. We had to rush home. I think it was about 15 minutes to the airport to get home, to get the necessary phone call so we can tell them exactly where we lived. They eventually brought them. I remember it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when everything was said and done. And there was my son with his family members who brought him over. And that was the end of the ordeal in regard to that. Now, back then, if I had known better, I did eventually contact Air Jamaica and say, look, this was not cool, what you guys did. This made no sense. And if I had the mind that I have today, I did not take the opportunity to say, I am going to sue your asses. Didn't do that. Instead, I allowed them to basically determine what they were going to give to me. And what they did was they gave all of us, me and my ex-wife, my son, and his family members, they gave us free tickets or vouchers for round-trip tickets to fly to Jamaica, I guess anywhere that Air Jamaica flew. And I was excited at the time because like, okay, great. Next year I don't have to pay for all these tickets, thousands of dollars for whatever we were paying back then to go down to Jamaica. And I left it at that. Looking back now, I wish I had gone ahead and said, no, it's got to be better than that. You got to, you know what I mean? Probably set me up in life a little bit better right now. Did not take advantage of the opportunity. But that is basically what happened on this flight, where it seemed like Air Jamaica lost my son over the Caribbean Sea. So there you have the story. Just figured out, just go ahead and tell it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to probably do a little bit more of these because I've written them out before and I've posted them on Facebook and people say, hey, you're a great storyteller, And to be perfectly honest, I think I write far better than I speak. So, but you know what? I figure I'll just go ahead and put it on video because a lot of people don't like to really read. So I'll put it on video and hopefully I could make it a little bit more entertaining here where you can actually see my expressions instead of looking at written words and don't exactly know what my feeling or vibe is as I'm writing the story. But here is the story and I just wanted to share it with you guys. There's another Air Jamaica story I have to tell, which I'm going to tell pretty soon. Stay tuned, but I think I'm going to deal with Guyana first.